The footprint was in basalt, not on basalt, in it, pressed into volcanic rock that had been solid for 60,000 years, on a planet where no human had ever been authorized to land, in a system where no human vessel had ever been granted transit clearance. The print was bare. 5 toes, an arch, a heel. Human. Unmistakably, forensically, impossibly human. And it was not alone. There were 14 of them, leading from the edge of a thermal vent field toward a ridge that overlooked the planet's primary ocean, spaced at the stride length of someone walking calmly, unhurried, as if they were out for a stroll on a world that the Galactic Council had classified as a restricted biosphere 8 centuries before my species had discovered fire. I am Senior Enforcer Drell Kathan of the Council's Office of Species Compliance. My job, for the last 23 years, has been to enforce the single most comprehensive restriction in galactic law, Resolution 1157, commonly known as the Human Containment Mandate. The resolution, passed unanimously by the Council 412 years ago, prohibits human beings from traveling beyond the boundaries of their home system. No human vessel may enter interstellar space. No human individual may board a non-human vessel. No human technology may be exported beyond the Sol system perimeter. No human communication may be transmitted on interstellar frequencies. The mandate is enforced by a cordon of automated monitoring stations, a dedicated enforcement fleet, and a legal framework so comprehensive that a human being found outside their system is, under Council law, not a person but a contaminant, subject to immediate capture, biological decontamination, and return. The mandate exists because the Council is afraid of humans, not the way you're afraid of a weapon or a predator, the way you're afraid of a fire. Humans are, by the Council's formal assessment, the most adaptable, most invasive, and most ecologically disruptive sapient species ever cataloged. Their biology is generalist to a degree that our xenobiologists call aggressively non-specialized. They can survive temperature ranges that would kill most Council species. They can metabolize an absurd variety of organic compounds. They reproduce without technological assistance. They heal from injuries that would be permanently debilitating for any other sapient. Their cognitive architecture is plastic, meaning they can learn, adapt, and restructure their behavioral patterns faster than any species in the Council's database. And they have a psychological trait that the mandate's original authors described with evident discomfort as an unmanageable compulsion to expand into every available environment regardless of risk, cost, or instruction to the contrary. The Council looked at humans and saw a species that, if allowed into the galaxy, would be everywhere within a few centuries. Not through conquest, through sheer biological persistence. They would settle, they would adapt, they would integrate, they would reproduce, and everywhere they went, they would change the ecosystem, the culture, the economy, and the power dynamics of every world they touched. Not maliciously, not deliberately, just by being what they were. So the Council's own predictive models showed that an unrestricted human population would become the dominant sapient presence in the galaxy within 800 years, not through war, through existence. So they passed the mandate, and for 412 years it held. The cordon held, the monitoring stations held, the enforcement fleet held. Humans stayed in their system. The galaxy remained as the Council preferred it, ordered, predictable, and human-free. Until the footprints. The first report came from Vesha 7, a mining world in the Outer Arm. A geological survey team found a set of human footprints in a sedimentary layer dating to approximately 900 years ago. 5 centuries before the mandate. Before first contact. Before humans had any known spaceflight capability whatsoever. The prints were embedded in stone, fossilized, verified by 3 independent laboratories as anatomically modern human. The Council classified the report. Standard procedure. Anomalous findings are reviewed internally before any public disclosure. I was assigned to investigate, not because the Council believed humans had actually been on Vesha 7 900 years ago, but because the presence of apparent human biological traces on a Council world was a potential mandate violation, and mandate violations are my jurisdiction. I went to Vesha 7, I examined the prints, I ran my own analysis, and I confirmed what the survey team had found. The prints were real, they were human, and they were old, far older than any possible mandate violation. Whatever had left these prints had walked on Vesha 7 centuries before the Council knew humans existed. I filed a report classifying the finding as a geological anomaly. Probable explanation: Convergent morphology. Some unknown extinct species on Vesha 7 had, by coincidence, developed a foot structure similar to the human form. It happens. Not often, but evolutionary convergence is a documented phenomenon. The explanation was thin. The prints were too detailed, too anatomically specific, too perfectly human to be convergent, but it was the only explanation that didn't require rewriting the timeline of human development, and it was the only explanation the Council would accept. 3 months later, the second report came in. Kethron 4, an agricultural world on the opposite side of the galaxy from Vesha 7. A construction crew digging foundations for a new processing facility had uncovered a layer of compacted soil containing human footprints. Carbon dating placed them at approximately 1,200 years old, 600 years before the mandate, 800 years before first contact. I went to Kethron 4. I examined the prints. They were identical in species identification to the Vesha 7 prints. Anatomically modern human, bare feet, walking stride, no associated artifacts, no tools, no clothing fragments, no biological residue other than the impressions themselves, just footprints. As if a human being had walked across the landscape, barefoot, left their marks in the soil, and vanished. I could not file the same report twice. Convergent morphology on one world is improbable but possible. Convergent morphology on two worlds, on opposite sides of the galaxy, producing identical results is not a credible explanation. I knew it. My superiors knew it. But the alternative? That human beings had been walking on Council worlds centuries before they were supposed to have left Earth was not an alternative the Council was prepared to consider. Because if humans had been out here that long, the mandate wasn't containing a species. It was denying a history. My supervisor, Director Vajan Tor, called me to a meeting after my Kethron 4 report. Tor is a career administrator who has spent 40 years in species compliance and whose primary professional skill is ensuring that difficult information is managed before it becomes disruptive. He told me the Kethron 4 report would be classified at the highest level. He told me the geological anomaly explanation would be maintained. He told me I would not discuss the findings with anyone outside the office. And he told me, with the particular firmness of a man who knows his instructions are wrong but intends to follow them anyway, that if additional reports surfaced, I was to handle them with appropriate discretion. Additional reports surfaced. Over the next 14 months, I received 17 more reports of human footprints found on Council worlds. 17, across 12 different star systems, on worlds ranging from dense jungle planets to arid desert moons to frozen tundra worlds, where exposed skin would cause frostbite in minutes. The prints varied in age from 800 to 14,000 years old. 14,000. That predated human agriculture. That predated human civilization. That meant someone or something with human feet had been walking on a planet 47 light-years from Earth at a time when humans on Earth were still living in caves and hunting with sharpened sticks. And every set of prints had the same characteristics. Bare feet, walking stride, no associated artifacts, no technology, no shelters, no waste, no evidence of habitation, settlement, or prolonged presence. Just footprints, as if humans had appeared, walked across the landscape, and disappeared. Over and over, across thousands of years, across the entire galaxy. I was running out of explanations. That was the first shortage. The Council needed explanations that didn't undermine the mandate, and I had none left. Convergent morphology couldn't cover 17 worlds. Contamination from modern human sources couldn't explain prints that were 14,000 years old. Hoax or fabrication couldn't explain prints verified by independent laboratories using techniques that I personally supervised. Every explanation I could offer was thinner than the last, and every report that came in made the previous explanation less credible. I was an enforcement officer whose job was to maintain a 400-year-old legal framework, and the evidence was telling me that the framework was based on a false assumption. Humans hadn't been contained by the mandate. They had been here long before the mandate existed. Long before the Council existed, long before most Council species had developed writing. The second shortage was trust. Every classified report, every suppressed finding, yet every geological anomaly I filed was a crack in the system. The survey teams that found the prints knew what they had found. The laboratory technicians who analyzed them knew what the results showed. The local administrators on each world knew that the Council was classifying findings that should have been published. People were talking. Not publicly, not yet, but in the quiet, careful way that people talk when they know their government is hiding something and they haven't yet decided what to do about it. The third shortage was time, because the reports weren't slowing down, they were accelerating. Once the first few findings became known within the scientific community, even classified, researchers on other worlds began looking, not because they were told to, but because scientists talk to each other through channels that bureaucratic classification cannot fully control, and the rumor of human footprints on pre-contact worlds was the most interesting scientific puzzle in a generation. Within 18 months of the Vesha 7 discovery, survey teams on over 40 worlds had found human prints. The dates ranged from 500 to 60,000 years old. The geographic spread covered every spiral arm of the galaxy, and the pattern was always the same. Bare feet, walking stride, no artifacts, no settlements, no explanation. I was called to a full council session for the first time in my career. The session was classified at the highest tier. Every council species was represented. Director Tor presented the findings with the careful diplomatic language of a man trying to describe a fire without using the word burn. He characterized the footprints as anomalous biological traces of undetermined origin that bear superficial resemblance to the human species, and recommended a comprehensive multi-species investigation conducted under strict informational controls. The Council's response was immediate, and from my perspective, predictable. They did not authorize an investigation. They authorized a containment operation. The footprints were to be destroyed. Every site was to be excavated, the geological layers containing the prints removed and disposed of, and the locations reclassified as restricted zones under environmental protection legislation. Yeah, the cover story was elegant. The sites contained a newly discovered geological formation that was scientifically sensitive and required protection from contamination. No one would be allowed to visit. No one would be allowed to study what had been found. And the Office of Species Compliance, my office, was tasked with executing the operation. I was told to erase the footprints, all of them, across 47 worlds, to dig up the evidence, destroy it, and replace it with a lie. I want to tell you that I refused immediately. I want to tell you that I stood up in that council chamber and said no, that the truth matters, that you cannot erase a species' history because it frightens you, but I didn't. Not immediately, because I am a Veshan, and Veshan are thorough to the point of obsession. And before I could decide what to do about the footprints, I needed to understand what they meant. I needed to know how human beings had been walking on worlds across the galaxy for 60,000 years without ships, without technology, without leaving any trace except bare footprints in the dirt. I needed to understand the mechanism, because the mechanism would tell me whether the council was right to be afraid, or whether they were destroying evidence of something that changed everything we thought we knew about the galaxy. I had been given a containment operation. I turned it into an investigation. And what I found, across 3 months of unauthorized research conducted under the cover of the erasure operation, is the reason I am recording this account instead of following my orders. The footprints were not random. They were not scattered. When I mapped every confirmed site, every age-dated print, every location across every world, a pattern emerged. The footprints formed paths, not on individual worlds, across the galaxy. Each set of prints on each world was a single segment of a continuous route that connected dozens of star systems in a web so vast and so old that it predated every civilization currently sitting on the Council. Humans had been walking between the stars. Not flying, not using technology, walking, on foot, barefoot, across a network of paths that connected worlds in a pattern I did not recognize until I overlaid it with the oldest astronomical charts in the Council's archive and found a match that made my carapace contract with a chill I have never felt before or since. The paths matched the galaxy's gravitational filaments. It's the invisible threads of dark matter that connect star systems, that guide the flow of matter across cosmic distances, that form the deep structure of the galaxy itself. The humans had been walking along the gravitational skeleton of the universe, as if they could feel it, as if they could follow it, as if, at some point in their species' deep past, long before cities or writing or fire, human beings had possessed the ability to step off their planet and walk along the galaxy's bones from world to world. That ability was gone now. Whatever it had been, however it had worked, modern humans didn't have it. They were confined to their system, building ships, developing technology, pushing against the cordon, completely unaware that their ancestors had walked the stars barefoot and left their prints on every world in the galaxy. And the Council was about to destroy the evidence. Every print, every path, every trace of a capability so extraordinary that it redefined not just human history, but the history of every species in the galaxy. Because if humans had been here first, if they had walked these worlds before any Council species had evolved, then the galaxy wasn't the Council's to govern. It was, in some deep and ancient sense, theirs. I had 47 worlds to erase. I had 3 months before the Council expected the operation complete, and I had just discovered that the species the Council was most afraid of had been walking the galaxy since before the Council's oldest members had crawled out of their respective oceans. I was running out of time, running out of cover, running out of explanations that would satisfy Tor and the Council. And I was beginning to understand that the real shortage wasn't evidence or time or trust. The real shortage was courage, because I knew what the footprints meant, and deciding what to do with that knowledge was going to cost me everything I had spent 23 years building. The erasure teams were already en route to the first 7 worlds. I had days, not weeks, days, to decide whether to follow orders and bury the most important discovery in galactic history, or to defy the Council and let the truth walk free, the way the humans had, 60,000 years ago, barefoot, unafraid, across the bones of the galaxy. I started with sabotage. Small, careful, deniable sabotage. The erasure teams were using geological extraction equipment designed to remove sedimentary layers without disturbing the surrounding strata. Precise tools. Expensive tools. Tools that required calibration data specific to each site's mineral composition. Data that I, as the operations commanding officer, was responsible for providing. I provided the wrong data. Not dramatically wrong, subtly wrong. Enough to cause extraction failures, equipment damage, and delays that looked like incompetence rather than interference. I bought myself 8 days before Director Tor sent a logistics specialist to investigate the delays. 8 days. That was the first trade-off. 8 days of freedom in exchange for an investigation that would eventually trace the calibration errors back to me. I had used my career's worth of credibility to purchase a little more time, and when the time ran out, the credibility would be gone. I used the 8 days to do 2 things. First, I copied every piece of data I had accumulated during the investigation. Every footprint scan, every age analysis, every site coordinate, every overlay map showing the paths along the gravitational filaments. I compiled it into a single encrypted package and stored copies in 11 different locations across Council space. Using dead drop protocols I had learned during my enforcement training. If the Council destroyed the physical evidence, the data would survive. Somewhere, in someone's hands. Eventually. Second, I went to Earth, not to the surface. The cordon wouldn't allow that, but the monitoring stations that formed the cordon's inner ring were staffed by Council personnel, and as a senior enforcer, I had inspection authority. I docked at Station 7, the closest monitoring post to Earth. And I used the station's long-range sensors to do something that nobody in the Office of Species Compliance had bothered to do in 400 years. I looked at the humans, not at their system, not at their electromagnetic emissions, not at their technological development metrics, at them, the actual people. Earth was crowded, 8 billion of them packed onto a single world, building upward and downward and outward toward the edges of their system, with the desperate energy of a species that knows it's been caged. They had colonized their moon. They had established outposts on their neighboring planet. They had built orbital habitats so densely packed that the space around Earth looked like a constellation of artificial stars. And they were pushing against the cordon, not militarily. They didn't have the capability to challenge the Council's fleet, but they sent probes, constantly. Small, unmanned, barely detectable probes launched from the far edges of their system, testing the cordon, looking for gaps, mapping the monitoring stations. They were looking for a way out, pressing against the walls of their cage with the same persistent, patient, infuriating determination that the mandate's authors had tried to contain 4 centuries ago. I watched them for 6 hours. I watched their ships moving between worlds. I watched their communication traffic, the dense electromagnetic soup of 8 billion minds talking to each other constantly about everything and nothing. I watched a species that had once walked the galaxy barefoot and now couldn't get past its own outer planets. And I noticed something. The monitoring station's long-range bioscanners were calibrated to detect human biological signatures within the cordon perimeter. Standard equipment. Part of the mandate enforcement infrastructure. The scanners showed Earth's population, the moon colonies, the Mars outposts, the orbital habitats. Everything where it was supposed to be. But when I recalibrated the scanners to maximum sensitivity and extended the range beyond the cordon, beyond the outer perimeter, into the interstellar space that the mandate said was human-free, I found something that made me sit down very slowly and stare at the screen for a long time. There were humans outside the cordon, not ships, not probes, humans. Individual biological signatures dispersed across interstellar space, moving along paths that I recognized instantly because I had spent 3 months mapping them. The gravitational filaments, the galaxy's bones. Humans were walking them. Right now, not 60,000 years ago. Now. There weren't many. Dozens. Maybe 100. Scattered across vast distances, moving slowly by interstellar standards but impossibly fast for beings without ships. Each one a single biological signature, barefoot, unshielded, unaccompanied, traveling between the stars the way their ancestors had done. The ability wasn't gone. It wasn't extinct. It was rare, hidden, occurring in individuals who probably didn't even know what they were doing, who probably thought they were dreaming or hallucinating or experiencing some form of episode that their planet's medicine couldn't explain. People who stepped off a mountain or walked into a desert and found themselves on another world, following a path they could feel but couldn't see, leaving footprints in the soil and then finding their way back home without understanding how. The walkers, that's what I started calling them. The humans who could still do what their species had once done naturally. Walk the filaments, step between worlds, leave nothing behind but bare footprints in the dirt. The Council's cordon was useless against them. You can blockade ships. You can't blockade someone who walks through the structure of space itself. The mandate had been designed to contain a spacefaring species. It had not been designed to contain a species that didn't need space to travel. The humans weren't breaking the cordon. They were beneath it, around it, through it. Me walking paths so fundamental to the galaxy's architecture that no monitoring system could distinguish their passage from the natural flow of gravitational energy. I sat in the monitoring station and I understood for the first time why the Council was really afraid of humans. Not because they adapted quickly, not because they reproduced without technology, not because they were biologically persistent. Those were the reasons in the official assessment. The real reason, the one that the mandate's original authors had sensed but never articulated, was that humans belonged to the galaxy in a way that no Council species did. They were woven into its structure. They moved along its deepest lines. They had been part of the galaxy's living architecture since before the Council existed. And no law, no cordon, no mandate could change that. Because you cannot ban a species from a place that is part of their biology. My 8 days ran out. Tor's logistics specialist arrived at the first erasure site and found the calibration errors. The investigation began. I was recalled to Council headquarters for a formal review. I went because I had nowhere else to go, and because the data was already distributed, and because there was one more thing I needed to do before the system closed around me. I requested a hearing before the full Council. As a senior enforcer facing a formal review, I had the legal right to present evidence in my own defense. The Council granted the hearing because refusing it would have been a procedural violation, and the Council, above all things, respects its own procedures, even when those procedures are about to be used against it. I stood in the Council chamber, every species represented. Director Tor in the gallery, his expression the particular Vatian blankness that means someone is preparing for the worst, and I presented my evidence. Not the sabotage, not the calibration errors, not my unauthorized investigation. I presented the footprints, all of them, every site, every age analysis, every path mapped along the gravitational filaments, every overlay showing the routes that connected worlds across the galaxy in a web so old it predated every civilization in the room. I showed them the data from the monitoring station, the walkers, the humans moving between stars right now, without ships, without technology, along paths that the cordon could not block, because the paths were part of the galaxy's gravitational structure. And then I showed them the thing I'd found during my last hours at the monitoring station, The thing that had made me decide to burn my career and my freedom and everything I had, because the alternative was allowing the Council to continue a 400-year mistake that was going to become a 400-year atrocity. I had mapped the walkers' paths, current paths, real-time movements of human individuals traversing the gravitational filaments across Council space. And I had compared those paths to the ancient footprints. The routes were the same, identical. The walkers were following the exact same paths that their ancestors had walked 60,000 years ago. The same routes, the same worlds, the same footprints, pressed into the same soil, generation after generation across millennia, as if the humans were maintaining something, tending something, walking a circuit that served a purpose so old that even they had forgotten what it was. But the paths told me. The data told me. Because when I mapped the complete network, every ancient print and every modern walker, the pattern that emerged was not random and not navigational and not migratory. It was structural. The paths the humans walked along the gravitational filaments were reinforcing them, strengthening them. The act of walking the paths, of passing biological matter along the filaments, of leaving traces in the soil of connected worlds was maintaining the gravitational structure of the galaxy itself. The filaments degrade. That's something our astrophysicists have known for centuries. Dark matter structures lose coherence over cosmic time. The threads that connect star systems thin and weaken and eventually dissolve, and when they do, the gravitational relationships between those systems change. Orbits shift. Systems drift. Over billions of years, a galaxy without maintained filaments would lose its structure entirely. Stars would scatter. Systems would isolate. The web of gravitational connections that makes interstellar travel possible, that makes the galaxy a connected place instead of a collection of isolated points, would fall apart, unless someone maintained it, unless someone walked the paths, regularly, persistently, for thousands of years, pressing their feet into the soil of connected worlds, depositing biological matter along the filaments, creating an organic anchor that reinforced the gravitational connections between star systems. Not technology, not engineering, biology, the simple act of a living being walking from one world to another along a gravitational thread over and over, generation after generation, keeping the thread strong by using it. Humans were the galaxy's maintenance crew. They had been maintaining the gravitational structure of the Milky Way for at least 60,000 years, probably longer, walking barefoot between the stars, leaving nothing behind but footprints and keeping the galaxy together through the oldest and simplest technology in the universe, putting one foot in front of the other, and the Council had locked them up. For 412 years, the Council had caged the species responsible for maintaining the structural integrity of the galaxy, and for 412 years, the filaments had been degrading without maintenance. Our own astrophysicists had noted the increased rate of gravitational filament decay over the last few centuries. They had attributed it to natural cosmic processes. It wasn't natural, it was neglect. The Council had banned the gardeners from the garden, and the garden was dying. I presented this to the Council chamber in the silence that follows the kind of information that makes powerful beings feel small. Representatives from 800 species, each one part of a government that had spent 4 centuries afraid of a species that had been keeping their galaxy alive, sat and absorbed the implications of what they had done. I told them the filament degradation projections. If the walkers were not allowed to resume their paths, the most heavily degraded filaments would lose coherence within approximately 300 years. Interstellar travel along those routes would become impossible. Systems would become isolated. Trade networks would collapse. Species that depended on interstellar supply chains would face resource crises. The galaxy would not end, but it would shrink, each world becoming an island, each species becoming alone, unless the humans walked. Tor was the first to speak. He said very carefully, "Senior Enforcer Cathan, you are asking the Council to rescind the mandate." I said no. I was not asking. I was informing. The mandate was killing the galaxy, slowly, invisibly, one degraded filament at a time. The Council could rescind it, or they could watch the structure of interstellar civilization unravel over the next few centuries. Their choice. But the footprints would remain in the data, distributed across 11 dead drops in Council space. And if the Council chose to continue the mandate and erase the evidence, I had arranged for the complete dataset to be transmitted on every open frequency in the galaxy simultaneously. The truth would get out, one way or another. Tor looked at me with an expression that was equal parts fury and something I chose to interpret as respect. He said, "You are destroying your career." I said my career had been built on enforcing a law that was starving the galaxy to death. Destroying it was the least I owed. The Council debated for 11 days. I was held in a detention facility during the debate, charged with sabotage, unauthorized investigation, misuse of enforcement authority, and threatening to disclose classified information. But the charges were accurate. I had done all of those things. I had done them because the Council had given me a choice between following orders and saving the galaxy, and I had chosen the galaxy. On the 12th day, the Council voted. The vote was not unanimous. It was not even close to unanimous. 406 species voted to rescind the mandate. 394 voted to maintain it. A margin of 12. 12 votes out of 800 between the galaxy's structural survival and its continued decay. The mandate was rescinded. The cordon was deactivated. The monitoring stations were powered down. And for the first time in 412 years, the Sol system was open. I was released from detention. The charges were not dropped, but they were suspended indefinitely. Which in Council legal parlance means, we know you broke the law, and we're choosing not to punish you because the law you broke was the one we just repealed. Tor didn't speak to me. He transferred to a different division. I don't blame him. He had spent 40 years enforcing a mandate that turned out to be the biggest mistake the Council had ever made. That's not something you process over lunch. The humans came out fast, not the walkers. The walkers had never stopped. They had been slipping through the cordon for centuries, maintaining what paths they could reach, doing their work in the shadows of a law that had tried to make their existence illegal. The humans who came out fast were the others, the 8 billion. And the builders and the dreamers and the impossibly persistent, ordinary people who had spent 4 centuries pressing against the walls of their cage and who now, suddenly, had no walls. They poured into the galaxy, ships, thousands of ships, then tens of thousands. They weren't an invasion. They were a species finally allowed to do what it had always done: expand, adapt, settle, integrate. They moved along the filaments as if they could feel them, even in ships, even without the walker's ability. They found worlds and they landed and they started building and growing and making the galaxy noisier and messier and more complicated than the Council had ever been comfortable with. Exactly as the mandate's original authors had predicted. Exactly as they had feared. And behind the ships, quieter, slower, barefoot, the walkers walked. Dozens of them, then hundreds, as the knowledge of what they were and what they did spread through human culture for the first time. Humans who had always felt the pull, who had always known there was something they were supposed to be doing, who had dismissed the urge as restlessness or wanderlust or a desire they couldn't name, finally understood. They were the gardeners. They were the ones who kept the paths open and the filaments strong and the galaxy connected. And they walked, world to world, star to star, barefoot, leaving nothing behind but prints in the soil and a gravitational structure that would hold for another 1,000 years. I watch them sometimes. From my apartment on the station where I've been living since the mandate fell. I have a telescope that can resolve individual biological signatures at interstellar distances. A tool I built myself during my investigation and never returned to the office because the office no longer exists. I point it at the filaments and I watch the walkers. Small points of life moving along the invisible threads that hold the galaxy together. Human beings doing what they have always done, what they were always meant to do. There is a path that passes near the station, a filament that connects 2 star systems about 40 light years apart. I've been watching it for 6 months, and 3 days ago, a walker came through. A young woman, barefoot, moving along the filament with the unhurried stride that I have now seen in footprints on 47 worlds across 60,000 years of geological record. She passed within a few thousand kilometers of my station, close enough for my instruments to register her heartbeat. She was humming. I could detect the vibration through the bioscanners, a low rhythmic melody that my database couldn't identify, something old. Something that might have been passed down through generations of walkers, from a time before the Mandate, before the Council, before any of the civilizations currently arguing about trade routes and territorial boundaries in the newly opened galaxy. She walked past my station and continued along the filament, toward the next world, the next set of footprints she would leave in the soil, the next thread she would strengthen simply by being there. She didn't know I was watching. She didn't care. She was doing what humans do, what they have always done, walking, barefoot, across the galaxy's bones, keeping the lights on. The Council banned humans from space travel because they were afraid of what humans would do to the galaxy. They should have been asking what the galaxy would do without them. 412 years of fear. 412 years of a cage built around the wrong assumption. And all that time, the footprints were there. On every world, in every stone, waiting for someone to stop being afraid long enough to read what they said. They said, "We were here. We have always been here, and we will keep walking until the stars themselves forget how to shine." The Council calls it the Restoration now, a diplomatic term for the period of adjustment following the Mandate's repeal, a polite word for the chaos of 8 billion humans flooding into a galaxy that had tried to pretend they didn't matter. I call it something else. I call it what the footprints called it, 60,000 years before anyone built a council or wrote a law, or decided that fear was a good enough reason to cage a species that was holding the universe together. I call it coming home.